Bobby Bovell. I'm grateful to be with you at Mount Pisgah for your digital discipleship journey. Today, our topic is how can being spiritual help me live life to the fullest? Well, author Rob Bell in Everything is Spiritual juxtaposes angels as purely sentient spiritual beings above the planet and Earth as an entirely physical domain below, then describes humans as a hybrid of the two, having both spiritual and physical dimensions. Then bridging both realms, our personhood is a third space, as it were, making the human existence an inherently spiritual one, just as much as our flesh, blood, and bones make it an undeniably physical one. Perhaps it comes more easily or naturally to us as a species to maximize our physical potential because it's so visceral. Appetite, fatigue, sexuality, for example, all stem from deep inner longings which find fulfillment in concrete physical events like eating or sleeping, etc. What's more difficult is to grapple with harnessing our spirituality to the effect that it positively impacts our well-being. I want to share some insights on how spirituality looks in real life, drawing parallels from an ancient sacred text in chapter 37 of the book Ezekiel the prophet, from which the book derives its name, has a vision set in a valley of bones. Now, I've chosen this rather obscure and somewhat macabre portion of the Bible because it rather practically shows how a metaphorical life to death journey can take place. And I believe that that transition is what allows us to live life to the fullest when spirituality is taken into account. Chapter 37 competes for most famous part of the book Ezekiel with the vision of the wheel in the opening chapter of the work. Both portions of the book, chapters 1 and 37, have songs inspired by their source material, performed by a cacophony of different musical artists, from gospel to folk to pop to blues. Artists including Louis Armstrong and Johnny Cash, to name a few, have covered the songs, but their origins are deeply rooted in the Negro spiritual tradition, and small wonder that these songs have reached beyond church culture to popular culture, because like all art, they remind us that we have a soul by speaking to our inner selves in much way that the divine speaks to the inner reality of the bones in this story. Let me just read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 37 to start off with, and then we'll just work through the story until verse 14. God grabbed me. God's spirit took me up and set me down in the middle of an open plain strewn with bones, and he led me around, and among them a lot of bones, and they were born bones all over the plain, dry bones bleached by the sun. Now, this scene, though alien to most of us, aside from maybe as a reminder of an apocalypse or zombie movie we may have seen, was a sight one might potentially stumble across on the actual plains of the ancient Near East. Because after a battle, the losing side's warriors, having no one to bury them, would just be left out for their bodies to decompose, leaving a literal valley of dry bones, just like the one that Ezekiel sees. God challenges the state of mind of being dead by asking the question, can these bones live? And this sacred encounter is aimed at encouraging Ezekiel that it's possible to traverse the difference between those two states, to go from bones to living life to the fullest. Now, it's important to get some background here. Why does Ezekiel need hope? He's a spiritual leader in a nation whose meta-narrative and reason for being has fallen on rather hard times. Their self-image is shaky because they've been defeated in a war with a neighbor nation, the direct consequence of which is the seizure of their land and the loss of their sovereignty and their right to self-govern. And with their national dream in tatters, their hope is quite understandably gone. And Ezekiel compares this lack of hope with spiritual death. Spirituality is an awareness of a bigger story than ourselves. And it's hope in that bigger story that installs positivity and joy in our souls. Hope is the restoration of our confidence in the future. In other words, it's the firm belief that better days are coming. Now, hope can, of course, be challenging because if you hope for something, you can end up getting disappointed if it doesn't happen. But it's important to distinguish hope from optimism, because optimism implies more control over your circumstances and outcomes because you know that the desired result is within your reach. Like saying, I'm optimistic I'll pass my exam because I've studied for months. Hope is a more general experience and linked to spirituality because it allows you to put faith in the divine plan for your life and the universe while challenging you to have confidence in the future despite present circumstances, which may or may not be within your control. The task of any sacred encounter is to provide us with hope, which coincidentally doesn't mean ignoring the negative aspects of life. It's God who takes Ezekiel on the tour of the dry bones, suggesting that spirituality is not about putting your head in the sand, but rather about daring to meet your circumstances head on. And that's a real great and robust spirituality. Nowhere in the Christian understanding of life is one promised that everything will work out the way that you want it to, or that you'll be spared pain in life. The difference with Christian spirituality that allows us to live life to the fullest is that there is a promise that no matter what you go through, there will be power from God. There'll be power from outside of yourself to enable you to navigate those challenges. So we don't necessarily just pray for a good life, even though we can do that. We pray for the power to live the life that we should, no matter what happens. Case in point, it's certainly a task outside of the abilities of these bones to bring themselves alive. So the state of being spiritually dead requires external intervention. Ezekiel is instructed to do something called prophesy. In other words, to announce a change in the reality to the bones. And in this context, the divine speaks to our inner selves, challenging us to maintain a healthy internal dialogue, one which restores our confidence in the future. This external input formulated in verse 5 like this: watch this, I'm bringing the breath of life to you and you'll come to life, is followed by the bones becoming bodies. But as Ezekiel notes in verse 8, even though the bones have come together, they are without breath. There's a marked difference between surviving and thriving, or just existing and being alive. Death is a certainty for all of us, but it's a great tragedy when someone spiritually dies before they're dead. Now, when I say spiritually dead, I don't mean that in a religious sense. I'm talking about life, because your life is where spirituality is realized. It's all about relationships and conversations and dreams and work and play and creativity and curiosity and community and physical motion. That's where spirituality thrives. Ezekiel speaks once more, prompting the breath of life to collaborate with these now fully formed bodies. Breathe on these slain bodies, he says, breathe life. But when they stand up as a vast army, their inner dialogue isn't good, and they say their bones are dried up and their hope is gone and there's nothing left of us. And then comes another prophecy, a challenge to create new realities with the divine. I'll dig up your graves and bring you out alive, O my people. Things like, when I dig up your graves and bring you out as my people, I'll breathe life into you and you'll live. Then I'll lead you straight back to your land. See, this vision is a vision of real life, of loving relationships, deep conversations, interesting pastimes, creativity, physical exercise, and other means of making life meaningful, which are the hallmarks of a deeper spirituality. So framing spirituality in this way allows us to avoid viewing it as something otherworldly and distant, but rather as something that happens in the real world and happens in real lives. It's all the things we do to improve our existence which make us alive. Spirituality can be experienced when we are intentional about the types of external input that come to us so that we can improve our internal dialogue. It can be done through soul-stirring music or through breathtaking art, through written books, thought-provoking films, perspective-enhancing travel, when we're allowed to do that again, future-creating fashion, and cool collaborations of all kind. It is a spirituality which improves our existence, daring us to achieve a harmonious connection between body and spirit, and challenge us to maintain that healthy dialogue which affirms that hope creates a more robust experience for humanity. The question is asked, can these bones live? Yes, they can. Once we embrace our humanity and the inherent spirituality that comes within it, then the bones can live. Once we embrace a confidence in the future, then the bones can live, instead of living in the past and all this thinking about the way that things have not worked out in the past, but to look forward into the future with hope and to begin to dream. Without a dream in our hearts, are we really alive? Without doing something where it's risky and it might not work out, are we really alive? Playing it safe typically doesn't yield all of the best results. I'm not saying we should go out and do silly things to put ourselves in danger. But I'm saying that if there's no real risk, if there's nothing really at stake, are we really alive? We may just be surviving instead of thriving, but spirituality can help us live life to the fullest by calling us out of a dead state where we're just going through the motions and going around in circles, where we don't believe that you can go forward. Living in the future means that you're going forward into something new, into something of an adventure in your life, instead of staying in the same place and going round and around in circles. So I hope this small word on how spirituality can help us live life to the fullest was helpful to you. And I'm just wishing you all the best in your well-being, that everything you do when it comes to speaking and engaging with the divine has a positive effect on your life and makes your life more full and more meaningful. Peace. Hi guys, I'm Bobby Bovell. I hope that that word made sense to you. If you have any questions, then please do feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to clarify and answer. There is one question here, which is, how do you reconcile the favoritism, racism, and sexist acts found in the Bible as a minority millennial? I think this is a really great question, because clearly there are many instances in biblical accounts where people are being discriminated against based on their race and background, or based on their gender. And to our contemporary ears, a lot of these things really tend to stick out. And it can often seem as though these things are being initiated by God, the racism or the sexism or the favoritism that's found in the Bible. But I think that it's important to remember that the Bible is always recorded in a specific place and time with a specific culture from which it is being interpreted. And it's important to be able to differentiate between the things that are being said by God, by the divine, and the things that are being said by humans and that are a reflection of their culture. For example, you may find in different portions of the Old Testament or the New Testament rather sexist views about women and their place in the world. But these don't reflect what God is saying. These reflect the culture of the time, and often people project onto God their own understandings of reality. There's an ancient proverb, Jewish proverb, that says we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. So often, if you come across some part of the Bible where there is favoritism or racism or sexist acts, it's important to remember that those are human behaviors and human reactions and human interpretations of who God is, not actual divine revelations of what God is all about. God doesn't deal with favoritism. Everyone is equally a child of God. God doesn't place a emphasis on the survival or blessing of one nation over another, and he definitely doesn't differentiate in terms of sexism. Even when you look at the way that the opening chapters of the book of Genesis are written, it says that God created humans, that he created man and woman, not that he is a man. Obviously, because of the way that the culture was at that time, everything is formulated in a very patriarchal way. But that doesn't mean that God is man or woman. God creates man, God creates woman, and man and woman are equal based on the by virtue of creation, by virtue of all being mortal beings that have their origins in divine creation. So I hope that makes sense. Do we have a comment here? Any new questions? If you guys could put them in the chat for me, that would be great. Right, okay, so yeah, easier said than done is one of the comments that is coming from Cheryl. Yes, you're right, it is easier said than done, and I think it's important to recognize that once these ideas are misunderstood and placed in the biblical context, then they can become very powerful, because they don't feel as though they are human. They feel as though they are being enforced by God. But it's important to unlearn those ideas and get ourselves into communities where there are anti-racist agendas, and communities where there are anti-sexist agendas, communities where there is diversity, and that kind of favoritism that we often experience is not being co-signed by that community. So I think that yeah, it's definitely easier said than done, and it's a process, and like any new idea, it takes time for these ideas to take root. I mean, when you see the way that Jesus is reacting and dealing with women in the book of John and the book of the Gospel of Luke, for example, even his own disciples are giving him some pushback, because he is treating people equally and involving them in his mission and work on the level that they don't feel those people should be involved. And often it takes them a long time to understand that they're not better than a woman. So it's really important to continue that process, because yes, it is easier said than done. All right, so the question is, how do we know if we're spiritually alive or dead? Well, I think the question itself, am I spiritually alive, is a indication that God's spirit is working in you, because I don't think you'd ask that question if you were spiritually dead, so to speak. You wouldn't even necessarily think about it. You wouldn't have a sense that it was something you needed to change. So I believe that that's the first thing. If you're asking the question, am I spiritually alive, then you are you're on the road towards being there. And I believe that in some sense everyone is spiritually alive, but there needs to be some form of awakening for us to realize that spirituality is something that happens in our day-to-day lives. It's not something that happens in some form of spiritual life that is on the side of our actual life. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen by some special formula. Spirituality happens when you have that awakening to the fact that you are a spiritual being, and therefore all your actions are in some sense spiritual. And I believe that we are in a process of moving towards becoming more alive all the time. I mean, how much of our life is doing the same thing over and over and again? Maybe we can inject spirituality by the external inputs, right? So stopping to smell the roses, making sure that when we're speaking to people, we have a proper conversation with them and we give them our attention. We're present in the moment, and that our souls are capable of receiving love and giving love, that we're able to be optimistic, that we're able to be grateful, that we're able to have hope. I believe shows that we are spiritually alive, especially in spite of our current circumstances. All being well, then we can say, all right, I know that I am spiritually alive, because even though I haven't finished my education yet, I'm optimistic and hopeful that I will finish it. You see what I mean? Even though life might not be where you want it to be right now, you're optimistic and hopeful that it's going to be better, that a new day is going to come. So in large part, positivity shows us that we are spiritually alive rather than dead. And on a really practical level, our ability to forgive people, our ability to exercise patience, our ability to experience joy, our ability to play. I suppose it's like the difference between being a robot or being an actual human, right? If you're a robot, you're emotionless. You are unable to connect to other people. You're unable to connect to yourself, and your internal dialogue can be rather negative. So I believe that being spiritually alive is connected to, in large part, becoming more human, and becoming more yourself, becoming more of who God made you to be. I hope that makes sense. What's the difference between, questions that being asked is, what's the difference between being spiritual and being Christian? I don't think that there should be a difference. Because if being Christian is something to being spiritual, then do we want to be Christian? If spiritual is defined as an awareness of something bigger than yourself, and spiritual is defined as a confidence in the future, because God is bringing about his plan for you and for the world, then being spiritual is the same as being Christian, right? I suppose that in some sense, being Christian could become entirely a mental exercise where you give assent to a certain beliefs and things that you accept to be true, but then they may not actually exist in real time. So what I mean by that is that you can say that you believe in forgiveness, but then you haven't forgiven yourself, and you don't believe that you're forgiven by God, and you haven't forgiven others, and you don't believe that others have forgiven you really deep down. So that could be a small difference between being Christian in the traditional sense of the word and being spiritual in the sense that you could be signed up for something, but then you're not really using it. It's like having an app on your phone and you've signed up for that, but you haven't really used it. You haven't opened it up and taken pictures on it, or you haven't opened it up and played the game, or you haven't opened it up and and use the networking potential of that particular app. So on paper, you are you're on board, but in reality, you haven't really tried it out for yourself. You see what I mean? So that's what I would say on that question about the difference between being spiritual and being Christian. And I suppose we should also say that when I talk about spirituality, I'm talking about it in all the ways in which it increases our well-being and allows us to live life to the fullest. If that's not happening, then maybe you should question whether or not that spirituality is real. If there's no joy, if there's no hope, then maybe we should question whether that spirituality is working. Now, when I say joy and hope, I don't mean a change of your personality, because some people are melancholy and they're quiet, and spirituality doesn't mean that your personality changes, but it means that in some sense you have a deeper hope that goes beyond yourself, so that you can look at the future with confidence and believe that God has a plan for the world, for the universe, for you, and he's moving towards that plan, and you're putting your faith in that becoming a reality, instead of, on the other hand, saying, well, it doesn't matter what I do, it doesn't matter who I am, I have no control over anything, let me just give up, right? Spirituality is connected, especially Christian spirituality, is connected to the idea that better days are coming, and that you can put your faith in a plan that God is already working. You can join in that particular enterprise and participate in that, making your life meaningful. Any other questions before we close up? I believe. Did that make sense for those of you whose questions I answered? Did that make sense? Did the speech make sense? All right, give us a thumbs up if it makes sense in the comments. Just give us a thumbs up. All right, yes. Okay, I've got a comment here. Yes, it makes sense. If it makes sense, please give us a comment, thumbs up in the comments, so we know you're with us. We hope that you will continue to follow along on this digital discipleship journey, and that it gives you some practical tools for living a life that means something. And we'll just invite you to join us again next time as we delve into a new topic. All right, well, thanks very much for your time. I just want to say a word of prayer for you guys now. Let's just do that. Dear God, we want to thank you for this opportunity to be together and to consider what spirituality means. And I'm just praying that for each person who's listening, that you will allow your spirit to enter them and give them breath and life, so that we're not just existing, but we are actually living, that our relationships are meaningful, that our work is meaningful, that our free time and pastimes are meaningful, and that we're not just going through the motions and going round and around and not living in the past, but instead having confidence in the future and hope that you have got a plan for each life to make it what it should be. Thank you. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, peace, guys. See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this evening for Candid Conversation. If you love what you saw here tonight, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as turn on your bell notifications so that way you know every time we go live. Have any questions? Be sure to click the link in our description box and let us know your thoughts. And remember, ain't no judgment on this side. Also, be sure to like, comment, and share us on all of your social media platforms so that way your friends and family can be a part of the community as well and stay in the know of everything here at Mount Pisgah. See you next time.